It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Michael Charleston Xiao. He is the most active public historian on Philippine television. He lectures currently at De La Salle University, the Manila Department of History, and the University of Philippines Diliman Department of Broadcast Communication. He holds a BA and Master's in History and is a PhD anthropology candidate at UP Diliman. He is the co-author of the book Bonifacio, the First President and Bayani Biographies, Andres Bonifacio. He's also published in numerous academic journals in the social sciences. He created the Xiao Time television segment used by teachers and students on YouTube to help them learn their country's histories. He writes a Tuesday column named Walking History for the Manila Times, and was recently named by Esquire Philippines as one of the 100 most powerful Filipinos. So we are in the presence of greatness here, obviously. I will hand this off to Professor. Professor?
Makasaysayang araw po sa ating lahat. Historic day to everybody. Makasaysayang araw is a greeting that I actually made famous in the Philippines, because that is the greeting that I give for our audience in my former segment in the government station, Xiao Time, where I talked about Philippine history for 3 minutes, and it's now being used in schools. I'm so glad to be with all of you in our embassy in Washington, D.C. Just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I spoke at the U.S. Embassy in Manila, and now I am. It's like in a way a great honor that the Filipino community actually invited me to talk to you to talk to you there in our embassy in Washington, D.C. This is the second time I talked virtually in Washington. Because I was a participant in one of the Rizal lectures, the Central Rizal lectures. Thank you for coming today. And again, I would like to greet our friends there at the, wait a minute. Oh, there it is. The National Federation of Filipino American Association Capital Region. And of course, I would like to thank Ryan Namata and Enciso as well for coordinating. And also to one of my students, Jarmaine Salvador, who actually introduced me to our two friends here from the National Federation. So thank you very much. I'll go straight. Oh, by the way, my talk today is entitled "HARING BAYAN: The Rise of the Filipino Nation." So I'll just give more or less a summary of the birth of the nation from 7,000 years ago to our time today. No, sorry. Until 1898 or 1899, which is the establishment of the first Philippine Republic. So, Haring Bayan means sovereign people. And you will know later the background of this word. Very beautiful word. So again, this lecture is in connection to the 125th anniversary of Philippine independence and nationhood. All right. So again, thank you to the NAFAA and all our sponsors, Caesars Entertainment and Bevicard. I wrote a book called Andres Bonifacio, Bayani Biographies, and some of the things that we will be talking about are tackled in this book, which updates the story of the father of the Filipino nation, Andres Bonifacio. If you have I hope that you can subscribe to my YouTube and TikTok, follow me on my social media accounts and our websites. Okay. First, before I begin my story, I would like to talk about 4 themes or 4 clarifications about history. Number 1, ang kasaysayan ay hindi lamang mga listahan ng events. History is not just a list of events. We're not just talking about events here. More or less what my attack in talking about Philippine history is I attack it through concepts that we learn from our ancestors and how they continue through time. So, because kasaysayan, our word for history, came from the word saysay, which can mean one, a story, and number two, it can also mean importance, relevance, meaning, uh, saysay. What does it mean for us? Uh, what is the relevance of these stories? Number two, there's no pure Filipino culture. When people are saying that we should go back to Filipino culture, we're not talking about, building bahay kubos once again. But we see Filipino culture, despite its dynamism, despite changing through time, that there is a pattern that we see, or a spirit that we see from the beginning of our culture, that continues to the various changes in our culture. The other thing is, history, ang kasaysayan ay nagpapatuloy na kaisipan. As I said, when we talk about history, we just don't talk about singular events. We would like to put these important events as part of a continuous consciousness. The consciousness that continues, that came from the wisdom of our ancestors. So that when we talk about Philippine history, we're not just talking about list of events or list of names or trivia. Trivia means useless information. We do not want to waste our time with useless information. But how we put this disparate information to a narrative that tells something about who we are as a people. And number four, our country, our Haring Bayan, our nation was founded by the words and the works of artists, because our heroes became artists so that they can creatively convey that we are one people despite our differences. All right, thank you very much. So I would like to begin my story with this. This was in 1904, and this is in Louisiana, in St. Louis. When Americans first heard about Filipinos, or when they started to hear about Filipinos, they were thinking of the St. Louis Exposition, the World's Fair of 1904. When the American colonizers brought some of our people to St. Louis so that they could be exhibited as part of the, shall we say, the Pax Americana. This is the American piece that we're going to implement in some of the countries of the world. And we will change the culture of these exotic peoples. What happened was, in the St. Louis World's Fair, the most watched and the blockbuster pavilion was the Philippine Pavilion. And why? Because they were looking at our ancestors, and they were and they were like being shown as eating dogs. And that's why Filipinos were known as dog eaters. They also showed this Bagobo chieftain, Datu Bulan or Datu Moon, with the splendid, beautiful long hair. And this is how we were pictured before. And in many ways, we all know that now that is degrading. And that is why we should celebrate, because in many ways, things are different now. The Filipinos are being known around the world for our kindness, for our resilience, for the good traits that we have. But as we all know, things also remain the same. Things change and things remain the same. And race is still an issue. I started with St. Louis because in many ways, how some people think about our ancestors, that they were stupid, is still what some people think about our ancestors. We Filipinos. Why? Because a lot of the books that we read when we were young, like this one, tells us that the Philippines were part of the lesser lands. This was a book from the 1960s. And if you're going to look at it, it says there, before the coming of the Spaniards, as we have hinted, the Philippines were backward in civilization as compared with most of the rest of the Far East. The Filipinos were still but partly removed from the primitive stages of culture. They had no elaborate political organization. If you're going to look at it, this is how Filipino kids read about their own ancestors. Which, of course, if you read about it and you say that you came from them, our ancestors are stupid, then it has an implication about how we look at ourselves as a people. And if you're going to look at how history was previously discussed, it was really very short because people are just so excited for Magellan to come to the Philippines and to execute Rizal in their story. So this is the big problem. We really do not see history as the development of how we became a nation from being bayan to being bansa. But no, we look at it as, before the coming of the Spaniards, we were stupid. There was no culture. And then when the Spaniards came, culture came in. Our faith, we learned our faith in God, which is, we had our own faith and persuasion about God before. The question, of course, that is hard to answer is who or what is the Filipino? And why is it very hard to answer? Because we're a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual, and multi-religious people. 171 languages with 171 different cultures. What is the Filipino nation? Who are the Filipino nation? Well, you should at least find some semblance of commonality in this vast array of people, and that is why we the historians, we look at our ancestors. But before that, we always sometimes we don't begin our history with our what do you call this, with our ancestors, because according to some people, hmm, history was history is the written record of past events. And when you talk about written history, it came from the Europeans. And that's why we always begin Philippine history before with Magellan. And there's a song before, and I don't know if you still know this, or your father or your mother were singing this. They were singing on March 16, 1521, when Philippines was discovered by Magellan. So if you're going to look at it, our children, the young people were told that we were just discovered by Magellan on March 16, 1521, which tells us that it was the Europeans who gave us culture. If you want to look at it in the Filipino perspective, what I want to say is this. On March 16, 1521, when Magellan was discovered by Philippines, you know why? Because we discovered Magellan. You will know the story later. We discovered him. of course, looking at the Filipino perspective, we were already here. We already had our elaborate culture. And so we begin. We used to talk, we were used to we were taught before that there were waves of migration that came to the Philippines, like the Negritos of the Aitas, and then the Indones, and then the Malays. It's a waves of migration theory by Otley Bayer. This is not true anymore. This is not this is not vetted by the experts anymore. And so we know that around 70,000 years ago, the out of Africa people came, and there was an evidence of an existence of a I think it is an hominid. It's called the Homo luzonensis, which lived here 70,000 years ago, around the same time eventually that the Homo sapiens sapiens will also come to the Philippines, or the Homo sapiens will come to the Philippines. This is the Kalaw woman, Kalaw caveman, or the Homo luzonensis as they are called by the expert. This newly discovered bones, a set of bones of a person. But what happened to us, what I'm focusing is the arrival of another group around 7,000 years ago, or 5,000 BC. And the experts called them the Austronesians. Okay, so who were the Austronesians? They probably came from, according to the hypothesis, they probably came from Taiwan and perhaps southern China. But definitely they came from Taiwan. We just don't know from Taiwan where they came from, but we believe that they came from South China. Okay, what happened was, through intermarriages, trade, and diplomacy, they were able to spread around Southeast Asia. So Bill Solheim and Peter Bellwood, they have two different hypotheses. Peter Bellwood said they came from Taiwan. Bill Solheim said they came from the islands. It doesn't matter. What happened was, the Filipinos, or the Austronesians in the Philippines, discovered how to make outrigger canoes. And because the outrigger canoes were invented, they became adept in seafaring. They became the experts and the masters of the seas. That's why they were able to spread our genes, our culture, from Southeast Asia to Polynesia, Micronesia, of course, which includes Guam, Hawaii, until the up to the Easter Island in South America, and Madagascar in South Africa. DNA-wise, and this was already proven, these are our cousins. They are all Austronesians. And it can be said that one of the earliest Austronesians are the present day, or are the ancestors of the present day Filipinos. Okay, I'll just show you a short video about what.
When the first modern humans began to migrate out of Africa, perhaps 100,000 years ago, Earth was a different place. During the last ice age, the coast of Southeast Asia extended out over today's islands of Borneo and Java. Australia was part of a larger landmass called Sahul. Between Sahul and the Asian continent lay a span of water 90 kilometers wide. Evidence of human habitation on Australia, therefore, is the strongest evidence we have that some sort of watercraft must have been invented as early as 50,000 years ago. The invention of seafaring vessels is one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. How daunting the endless sea must have seemed to early people. They knew that wood could float, but what if you put hundreds of pounds of people and goods on top of the wood? And how do you navigate once the familiar shore has vanished behind you? This is Guam as the first arrivals might have seen it. Lush, formidable, enticing. Soon, human inhabitants had spread out over the whole of the 30-mile-long island.
I think one of the most remarkable things about the Austronesians and the changes that they went through was their development of this boat technology. For the first time, they were able to sail across 1,500 miles of open ocean to isolated island chains such as the Marianas. This had never been done before in all of human history.
The first migrants to the Marianas would have come from the Philippines or islands in eastern Indonesia, speaking an ancestral Austronesian language. They brought cultivated plants with them, including taro, yam, and banana. On the islands, they found coconut palms and breadfruit, and rounded out their diet with fish from the sea. They were also skilled pottery makers, as evidenced by the wealth of pottery fragments that archaeologists have unearthed throughout the Marianas. Guam is still home to the descendants of these first arrivals. Today we know them as the Chamorros. Many of them still cherish their ancient seafaring traditions.
We were a seafaring society, and that's how we arrived here and settled the Marianas. And the Chamorros that call Guam home, they have this kinship with the water, and they're out there racing and working as a team. It's a great reflection of revitalization.
So if you look at the people from Guam, you will see that they were very much culturally and in appearance look like us. And this is an evidence of our Austronesian connection with each other. Okay. Even in words, we have similar words. We call them cognates. That tells us that we are connected with each other. So for example, in a house is called the bahay in Tagalog, balay in Visayan, balay in an Indonesian language, and bale in Pampanga. So you have here that despite the fact that these are different places, some are far away from each other, you still see the connection of each other. Same with our term for community, boat, and people are almost connected. Barangay, Burunga, Barao, Balu, Barao, Parao, Fera, Perao, Farao, Popua, Poruku, Peru, Papa. From different languages in the Austronesian world, you see that they are interconnected. Bangka in the Philippines is in Malay, Wangka, Bahasa. In Maori, it's Waka. In Vaturana and Savo, it's Vaka. In Alita, it's Vaga. In Tahiti, it's Vaha. So the farther it is from the oldest people, I think they tend to shorten the words. They shortcut it. So it's like how we modern Filipinos shortcut our language a lot of times. So we also see the evidence of our being Austronesian through artifacts. What I am wearing now is a replica of the linglingo. The linglingo is the pre-colonial, shall we say, pendant or earring of our earring. It's actually the earring of our ancestor, and it used to be made of jade. Okay, and there's no jade in the Philippines. There's only jade in Taiwan and South China. And so this is where you see that the design that was found in Batanes, that they were making in Batanes, they have a workshop of pre-colonial jade in Batanes that they found archaeologically. You will see here that they have similar designs in other parts of the Philippines that they found, and also not just there, but around Southeast Asia. So you will see the connection of the Austronesians even before globalization happened. And another thing is the architectural culture. So this is the Bahay Kubo. Kubo is Spanish. It came from Spanish cube, bahay kubo. So I also want to call it Austronesian house. If you're going to look at the Austronesian house, it's made of local materials. It's actually made for tropical climate so that anyone who's inside will feel kaginhawahan or comfort because air can freely move around it, and also the roof and the first floor will absorb the heat so that people will feel cool inside or maginhawa or comfort. There's comfort there. This is the Austronesian house. It's prevalent in other parts of Southeast Asia and Oceania. I would like to tell a little story about this because one American engineer visited the Philippines in the 1800s, I think after the Civil War. After he participated in the Civil War, his name is Engineer William Lee Baron Jenny. Okay, William Lee Baron Jenny went to the Philippines and saw the Bahay Kubo being uh, battered by a storm. And then what happened was the house just moved around, and so the good thing about it was it did not it did not fall. And so William Lee Baron, what's the secret of this Bahay Kubo? Why does it still stand? And so he saw that the secret of it are the four pillars that holds the house. And so that inspired him to design something. And because of this, he was able to invent the first skyscraper in the United States, in Chicago. Okay, the Sears, these are his creation. So he was inspired because of the Austronesian house. So we actually have a contribution to world architecture. And even so, even if, for example, there were American educated architects like Mapua, like Juan Arellano, for example, they created the neoclassical architecture, for example, in Manila, like the De La Salle College, like the post office which burned 2 weeks ago, uh, the City Hall, I don't know, the National Museum, for example. These were like Washington D.C. Like they were buildings in Washington D.C. But they actually fused American classical architecture to what we call, of course, the neoclassical came from Greek, Roman, then American, and but we fused Filipino because the windows were made of capiz shells. Of course, before they were able to renovate it, air can freely flow inside like the bahay kubo. So my point here is that the dynamism of our culture tells us that the bahay kubo architecture actually lives in modern Philippine architecture. All right. Another thing about Austronesians are they buried the dead in burial jars. So they're what we call the primary burial jars, where they bury the whole body, but you also have the secondary burial jars. These are more prevalent are the secondary burial jars, which also expresses their worldview, their faith. The most important um, burial jar in the Philippines is what we call the manunggul jar. If you look at the manunggul jar, it depicted a lot of our Austronesian heritage. In fact, in the design of the cover of the manunggul jar, you will see our maritime culture, and you will also see our belief in the anito and the kaluluwa and the afterlife, because you have there the kaluluwa, the soul of the dead person, being transported by a boat, because we believe that when we die, we will be transported by boats. And this is indication of our maritime consciousness, our maritime culture. Okay? Uh, so, if you're going to look at it, the Chinese, for example, learned a lot of their skills from the Austronesian people. And of course, the Chinese transported their navigational skills to Europeans. And that is why in many ways it is like an anomaly that the maritime knowledge that we were able to develop as Austronesians were eventually used against us by the Europeans. Huh? So, the evidence of our maritime culture during the time of our ancestors were the balanghays that were found in Butuan, which were pegged to be about more than 1,000 years old. So, they were not using nails to actually, this is the most fantastic thing about these boats is that they are using wooden pegs to put them together. Okay? So, if you're going to look at it, we have the different kinds of seafaring crafts. You have the balangay, and then of course you have the parao, which of course if you're going to look at the film, the Disney film Moana, which was of course set in the Pacific Islands, a lot of the things that you see there are actually part of Filipino and Austronesian seafaring. So a lot of the Philippines should actually be able to what they call this, to identify with the film Moana. We have warships called the Karakoa, where the warrior, the Baganis, fight or use to fight their battles. Also, there we all thought that constellations were taught to us by the Europeans, but our ancestors actually have a pre-colonial, shall we say, constellation, which was based on our culture. My former professor who passed away already, Dr. Dante Ambrosio, once wrote in his article that when the Filipinos look at the sky every night, they just don't see stars. They see their lifestyle, they see their culture. Why? Because if you're going to look at it, this is what we call the balatic. The balatic is the trap for wild boar, for hunting. They use this for hunting. If you're going to look at it, our ancestors in ethnoastronomy named Orion's belt as balatic. And this term is prevalent in many other ethnic cultural minorities and other languages in the Philippines. So this is where you see, again, as I'm saying, I'm pointing out the connectedness of Filipinos as a basis for nationhood through our Austronesian culture. This is the bubu, which is a fish trap. This is the bubu, is what we call the Big Dipper. So they're guided by the stars when they navigate. Also, they have diplomacy. They have finance. Our bayan, we call them the bayan here. The barangay is a misnomer. There's no barangay, which was a place name before the Spaniards invented it for us. They based the barangay on a false, on an erroneous narrative of a priest. There was no barangay place in the Philippines. We call our political unit the bayan. The bayan. And so the bayan in the Philippines, they were actually having connections with each other, which was proven by this 900 AD copper plate, which was found in Laguna. That's why it was called the Laguna copper plate inscription, in which the kingdom of Tondo, the kingdom of Laguna, the kingdoms in Laguna, the kingdom of one of the kingdom in Bicol, Binwangan, where they found the gold, and also the, shall we say, the kingdom of Butuan and the kingdom of Medang in Indonesia, were actually talking to each other through the and paying debts to each other as early as 900 AD. So it is not true that we did not have a culture. It is not true that we did not have a civilization. Even this drawing from the Spaniards, the Boxer Codex of 1593, tells us of how they saw our ancestors when they arrived. They were wearing silk because they were trading with China. They were wearing gold. uh, and by the time of the 1400s, there were already the centralized governments in Mindanao called the sultanates. And there were two sultanates, major sultanates, the Sultanate of Sulu and the Sultanate of Maguindanao. So this, we had quite an elaborate culture even before the Spaniards came. We were part of the Southeast Asia trade route to China. Our bayans were, the China trade passes through the bayans of our country. So we now go to the other evidence of our being Austronesian, which is the belief in the anito or the afterlife. If you're going to look at it, when we die, we go to the afterlife through the boat. And we become anitos. We take care of those who are left behind. That's why if you're going to look at the various artifacts of coffins in the Philippines, you see there in Butuan, in Cagayan de Oro, in Masbate, and in Cordillera, that they were using boat-shaped coffins to bury their dead after they have learned how to bury or how to put them in caves. They were using boat shaped coffins, and that's why I always emphasize that probably this is the reason why we call the dead person bangkay, because we put the bangkay in the bangka. So we first use banga, and then eventually we put the bangkay into the bangka. Okay? And when we started to learn how to bury our dead, we did not forget the bangka. We made grave markers that are made of bangka. In Batanes, for example, if you look closely, how many souls are there? There are two souls, obviously, but actually there's a third soul. The third soul is actually the boat itself, because we believe that things that came from nature, like the rocks, like the mountains, like stones, like wood, is inhabited by souls of our ancestors. They have a soul as well. And so they have a great respect for our environment. When they want to build houses, they still have to make rituals before cutting the trees. This is one lesson that we can impart to our, people, that we Filipinos love our nature. We respect nature. If you're going to look at the Muslims, for example, even if they're already Islamized, they still bury their dead with boat-shaped grave markers with the representation of human beings called the sunduk. So if you look at the manunggul jar, this is a very similar design to the sunduk of the Mindanao people. So you see Palawan, manunggul jar Palawan, and then you have Mindanao. Again, we're establishing the connections of our ancestors, our maritime culture, our maritime consciousness to our history. You also have here the representation of that spirit of our ancestor called the Anito. In Ifugao, they called it the Bulul. If you're going to look at other places in Southeast Asia, they also look the same. And if you're going to look at our Austronesian brothers and sisters in Rapa Nui in Easter Island, the Moais actually are buried bululs, buried giant bululs, just like the ones that we see in Southeast Asia. So you see that they are really part of the Austronesian world. You look at the Manunggul Jab, they have the same pose. The pose of what they call this pose, I forgot already. The fetal position. The fetal position. Why? Because when we die before, when Filipinos die before, we were brought back to the fetal position. Because that is how you were born, and you go back there. Same thing like that. And in Ifugao, for example, we mummify the dead. And the last, before we mummify the dead, the last, liquid that comes out of the bodies of the people, we have our handkerchief and we will wipe them so that we can also put them in our bodies. Why do we do that? Because we believe that the person has power, that when you die, you can transfer to the living. We call it in Visayas the gahum, the power or the gahum. That's why if you're going to look at it, that is how we also treated our Ranitos, and eventually that is also how we treated the religious images that the Spaniards brought to us. So when the Spaniards came here, and I will emphasize this later on, we looked at their faith, the Catholic faith, as we looked at our own faith. And that's why it was easily accepted by Filipinos. That's why when we wipe the dead, when we wipe the Anitos before, that is how we also wipe the dead Christ or the Black Nazarene of Quiapo, so that the power of the Nazarene goes to the handkerchief and there would be healing power there. It would become as well an anting-anting. As I said, we respected nature because it is the home of our ancestors. And true enough, we Filipinos, or the Philippines, is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. In fact, the center of biodiversity in the world is in Mindoro, in between Batangas and Mindoro, where you see so many species of different animals, plants, flora and fauna, and you name it. You name it. And including, of course, the Philippine eagle and this hornbill from Panay. So, going back, we go back to our belief in the afterlife and belief in the soul. And I believe that if we go back to this is the studies in Filipino psychology. We will be able to understand more the things that we find important. Before the coming of the Spaniards, early Filipinos believed, according to Zeo Salazar and other experts, to their studies of the old accounts, they believed that we have two parts of being a person. The outside, which is our body, and the inside, which is our, our life force. There are two life force that are part of the panloob. We call that the panloob. So you have the panlabas, or the body, the katawan, and you have the panloob. And the panloob have two life forces. In the brain, there resides what we call the kaluluwa. It brings will to the person. It gives knowledge to the person. But it is also connected to another life force which resides in the liver of the person, which is called the ginhawa. So one by one, let us explore these concepts. What is ginhawa? If you're going to look at ginhawa, and I know a lot of you still know this word. Ginhawa means comfort. Ginhawa means a healthy life, good breathing. When you eat, you feel ginhawa. When you have peace of mind, you feel ginhawa. Even sex, according to Zeo Salazar, is related to ginhawa. And so, ginhawa, when you go to the comfort room, you have ginhawa. When you can send your kids to school, you have ginhawa. When you have a comfortable life, you have ginhawa. When you don't have when you're not very ill, you have ginhawa. We Filipinos value ginhawa more than kayamanan. Because you can have all the kayamanan in the world, but if you are sick, then you're not maginhawa. You do not feel you do not feel successful. And so, for the Filipino, this is the highest thing that we aspire for. Kaginhawahan. And the life force ginhawa will only have effect if our kaluluwa is aligned in the heaven or matuwid. So, it is connected because the ginhawa will have effect if the kaluluwa is matuwid. Therefore, the kaluluwa or the soul of that person is a good soul. In fact, if you're going to just move away the alignment of that soul, especially with young kids, they will feel bad. They would have sickness, and that is what you call usog. Nausog ang bata because the kaluluwa's alignment was moved. These are early Filipino beliefs. I'm not saying you believe them again, but I'm stressing a point here. If you have a bad person, they call you halang ang kaluluwa. So you have matuwid na kaluluwa, you have halang ang kaluluwa. And you know the old action films, right? They say halang ang kaluluwa. And that is why my point here, ladies and gentlemen, is that if we want to have kaginhawaan, it should begin with mabuting kalooban, mabuting kaluluwa. A good soul. And how do you manifest a good soul? By loving a person, like your brother, like your sister. Our ancestors believed that our soul travel when we sleep, and that's why we need to take care of the butas ng katawan or the butas ng mukha, the holes in our face, and the extremities of our body, our fingers in the hands and the toes. And so, because our soul goes out of these outlets, we need to protect them by wearing gold, by wearing metal. Because when gold, when the gold, the light that the gold emits, is a deterrent to a bad spirit to come inside of you, a bad soul to come inside of you. So you protect your kaluluwa and you try to maintain goodness by wearing these gold ornaments. That's why we Filipinos, when Pigafetta, the chronicler of Magellan, saw the Filipinos, just like said, why are these people, even the ordinary people, wearing gold? And the design is exquisite and they have technology in doing in creating these designs, this gold. The implication, ladies and gentlemen, is this: even our ornaments have spiritual value for us. It reminds us that we want ourselves to be able to do good to other people. And that's why, as I said, our ancestors, according to Filipino psychology, value matuwid na kaluluwa, which brings forth kaginhawaan or well-being. You only become maginhawa, truly maginhawa, when you have matuwid na kaluluwa. So a lot of people are saying, why are the Filipinos, perhaps, why are we still not moving forward as much as we want to in the Philippines? And I would like to think that a lot of our leaders sometimes are, they're not as matuwid na kaluluwa. And I hope that there'll be more people to have matuwid na kaluluwa. A lot of them are already in government, but we need more, right? So, how do we now express matuwid na kaluluwa or kabutiang loob or goodness through the concept of kapatiran? And what is kapatiran, ladies and gentlemen? Kapatiran is from the word kapatid. Kapatid is to cut, napatid. Because if you're magkapatid, if you're brother and sister, you came from the same navel of your mother, which was cut during birth. Kaya magkapatid. And we're able to express kapatiran even if you're not brothers, biological brothers and sisters, through the act of the sandugo. Isang dugo, meaning one blood, your brothers and sisters. From one dato to another, they have sandugo, excuse me, and there will be a unified bayan. A unified bayan which is a stronger bayan. And when the bayan is birthed by the sandugo of your datos, then all the people there will now have to treat each other as brothers and sisters in spirit. The bayan is brought out of kapatiran or brotherhood or sisterhood. And of course, you express that through love. Very important. Through love. And if you're going to look at it, the embodiment of a person who have matuwid na kaluluwa and loving a loving person should be the bagani. Okay? What is the bagani? This is the, as I said, I hope that all of us will embody the spirit of the bagani. What is the bagani? The bagani is the warrior during the time of our ancestors. But it came from other concepts. Bayani, Berani, Wani. And if you put them together, these concepts of the Bagani, of the Bayani, meaning fearless, but also service. Wani is a Javanese word for someone who helps the people without expecting anything in return. Pagtulong at malasakit. And that's why we call the government employee in the Philippines a kawani. The kawani, the government employee, especially our diplomats in various parts of the world who keep the peace and take care of our people, you are all bayani. As kawani of our government. So being a bayani or a bagani has something to do with pagsasaayos, meaning fixing things in the group where you belong, and helping each other, protecting each other. Which in many ways, the concept of the bayani is different from a hero in the Western sense. Because a hero is an individual with a persona who is cut above the rest, while the bayani is part of the group. And the bayani may not be known to other people, but he still serves. And a warrior who had served his community by winning battles and bringing home the goods from the battles, the loot, the goods, and bringing heads that they cut off so that they can offer it to the ancestors. The bagani now is the bringer of ginhawa, well-being, the bringer of dangal, honor, and the bringer of life to the bayan of the community. According to Professor Vicente Villan, buhay, ginhawa at dangal ang dinadala ng bayani sa bayan. And if the person wins a battle, the bagani wins a battle, the tattoo artist, like Wang Od, for example, during the olden days, will put a tattoo or a batek to a person, and that's why he becomes a pintado. The bagani, the warriors of our ancestors in the north and the south, were tattooed. And they have, the more tattoos that they have, that means that they have more battles that they've won. They're skilled in what they do. And that tattoo now serves as their anting-anting, their protection, their sort of spiritual armor, as you may say it. And that's why, if you're going to look at it, the bayani, with a lot of batek or tattoo, then you're considered a skilled warrior because of that. You are now called batikan. Marami kang batik, batikan. And that's why a person today in the Philippines who is known to be expert in his craft is called the batikan. That word came from the tradition of the bagani. And in many ways, I believe that represents every Filipino, especially Filipinos in the diaspora, in the United States, where you use your skills to help our people. You are a batikan. You are a bagani. In the spirit of our ancestors, sa continuing consciousness through time. Recently, we commemorated the 500 years of Philippine independence, of the victory at Mactan. And we had a theme, we called it the quincentennial commemoration of the Philippines. We had a theme. It was called Victory and Humanity. Victory and Humanity. And as I said, the representation of the Batikan, of the Bagani, of our ancestor was Lapu-Lapu. He's the embodiment of that. We do not know our ancestors. They have no name for us. But they are all represented by this guy in our history, Lapu-Lapu, who, of course, when they were able to, when he was, he was meddling already in our affairs, we did not allow him through Lapu-Lapu. But that's the only thing that we know about the story of Magellan. We go back to humanity. In 1521, when Magellan came here, and I would like to emphasize this, we Filipinos are known, before the coming of the Spaniards even, to value what we call pakikipagkapwa-tao. It came from the concept of kapwa. When you see yourself in the other person, you see? When you see yourself in the other person. And so, when Magellan came here, in the history, in our imagination, they thought that they are handsome and they were like great guys who came here, and the ladies were were fascinated, and they said, "Afam." It's a joke. In the Philippines, the Afam is a foreigner assigned in Manila, and a lot of the girls want to date the Afam, and so probably they thought Magellan was a Afam. But the funny thing about it was that the Magellan came here. They were not the the conquerors that we thought they were. They were sick, 100 days in the ocean without proper food, water. They were eating sawdust. They were like drinking bad. They were dying of sickness. And actually, when they came to the Philippines on March 16, 1521, it was the Filipinos who discovered them dying. And when our ancestors saw them, they did not kill them. They knew that these people needed help. And so what happened was, the Filipinos gave them food and fed them and gave them the time of their lives. This is pakikipagkapwa-tao that we showed because we were adept at trade. That's why Filipinos are hospitable. We also believe in pakikipagkapwa-tao. And this is the thing that we also showed 1,300 Jews who are fleeing from the Holocaust, and their lives were saved because President Manuel Quezon decided that they should be saved. That is also the fate of 5,500 white Russians who were anti-communist. But when the Filipinos, learned that these anti-communists were under attack or under threat in China, where they were living, then the communists won there in 1949. We were able to bring them to the Philippines, 5,500, and save the white Russians to President Quirino. And that was also the same thing that we did with the boat people from the Indo-Chinese wars of the 1960s and the 1970s when they evacuated here. This is also what we showed people from the other side of the political coin during the EDSA People Power Revolution, where we gave our adversaries flowers, we hugged them, and we told them, why are we killing each other? We are all Filipinos. This is pakikipagkapwa-tao that we showed to a lot of things, especially during the pandemic, to a lot of events, especially during times of distress, during the time of pandemic. And this is also what we showed the world in many, many ways. You know, we had the Babaylan before, who was the priestess. They were the healers. They also communicate with the Anitos. And in many ways, we became the Babaylan to the world because of our frontliners who served the world during the COVID pandemic. Jose Rizal once said, with the new men that will spring from her bosom and the remembrance of the past. If we remember the past, and perhaps the people will revive their maritime and commercial activities. The maritime culture. If we bring it back, what will happen? According to Rizal, we will become free once more, like the bird that leaves its cage, like the flower that returns to the open air. They will discover their good old qualities which they are losing little by little, and again become lovers of peace, gay, lively, smiling, hospitable, and fearless. We will become maginhawa once again if we are going to go back to the spirit of our ancestors, the things that we have lost. We treated the Spaniards well until, of course, they already began to meddle in the political affairs and the way the community is organized. And so Lapu-Lapu resisted with that, and we killed Magellan. In many ways, the Bagani, who wins battles and brings back kaginhawaan, is embedded in the spirit of the migrant Filipino, who goes to other lands to fight battles of homesickness, of difficulties, and they bring back kaginhawaan as well. That is how I believe that the new heroes are our OFW. And in many ways, because of our migrant Filipinos, the Austronesian migration continues, but not just in Southeast Asia, but around the world. And that the spirit of the Bagani is with them. Please watch this video. As a form of a break, let's watch this animated video, which basically summarizes a lot of the themes that we discussed and the implications today. It's called The Filipino Story, Episode 1. What does it mean to be a Filipino? I am part of the team who made this. It's a film made by Bani Logroño and Mai Logroño from the Filipino School in California.
What does it mean to be Filipino? Is it our taste for strong, flavorful cuisine? Is it our obsession with playing basketball, even while wearing flip-flops? Or is it that strong sense of pride that we often feel when we see fellow Filipinos in the international spotlight? Maybe it's something much deeper than that. Maybe it's because we all share a mother tongue? Although we don't really have one, since there are over 170 unique Philippine languages. Some say it's the color of our skin, though that can't be it either, since Filipinos come in many different shades and skin tones. It used to be because we were all from the same archipelago, but now there are millions of Filipinos scattered all throughout the world, one of the largest recorded diaspora in history. If we really want to find out what it means to be Filipino, then we have to go back, way back to the story of one of our first ancestors called the Austronesians. They were a group of people that used the oceans and the seas like wide open roads at a time when other cultures were still inventing the wheel. Over 5,000 years ago, the Austronesians possessed advanced sailing technology that allowed them to explore and discover many different lands, one of them being the archipelago that would later become the Philippines. Eventually, they developed boats called balangays, which they used to explore the rivers and coastlines of these newfound islands. Within the boats, early Filipinos worked together as a community in order to make their daring journeys possible. From navigation, fishing, rowing, and steering, each person did their best to contribute to the journey in whatever way they could, because they were literally all in the same boat, and by caring for one another, they survived and thrived. This strong sense of togetherness took root at the core of Philippine culture, which is why we still call a small community in the Philippines a barangay today, named after the balangay boats of our ancestors that represented cooperation and collaboration. This idea of extending a helping hand to our neighbor in any possible way became known as bayanihan, from the Filipino word bayan, which means hero. And examples of the bayanihan spirit can be seen all throughout Philippine history. From tragic wars, natural disasters, and other calamities that the country has faced, it's the bayanihan spirit that Filipinos have counted on to keep them going. Filipinos being heroes to one another to help their brothers and sisters in their community, expecting nothing in return. Today, the bayanihan spirit lives on, expressed in many unique ways by modern Filipinos in the archipelago, as well as in distant foreign shores. Why do you think so many Filipinos want a job that involves helping others? Or that we are known as one of the most hospitable cultures on the planet? Or that Christmas season, a time of sharing and giving, lasts for 4 months in the Philippines? It's because deep within every Filipino, no matter how far we may be from our homeland, the flames of our past forge the bayanihan spirit into our hearts. And that's what we carry with us, no matter where we are. So to answer the question, what does it mean to be Filipino? Well, if we look at our history, I guess you could say that being Filipino means to care, to share, and to love. To love your family, your neighbor, and your community. Because at the end of the day, no matter where we are in the world, we are one people on the same journey, on the same boat.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that. That came from the Filipino school, the Filipino story, which we try to create. Answering the question, who and what is the Filipino, and hopefully drawing from our studies of the Austronesian, is a Bagani who cares for the other, a person with a golden and caring heart, the heart of the Filipino. I just hope that, I mean, if you want to find an easy answer, I hope that is an answer that is grounded on our on the what the things that we hold dear in our history. Well, of course, what happened was our way of life will change when the Spaniards will come to the Philippines through, at first, their carracks, and then eventually their galleons. In 18, after Magellan came, 40 years later, around 40 years later, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi comes to the Philippines in 1865 to conquer the Philippines by the cross and the sword. And what happened was, of course, it was said that they wanted to make us Christians, but in many ways, they only want, of course, they were using the religion, the cause to evangelize, to actually acquire our resources. And the strategic place of the Philippines in trading with other parts of Southeast Asia, like the Spices Islands in Indonesia, and of course, China. Of course, a lot of the people were obsessed in Europe with the products of Southeast Asia, like basil, like canela, the onions, for example. And the Chinese, for example, the China products like tea, porcelain, silk. And so they needed the Philippines as a sort of their base in Southeast Asia. And in many ways, because of that, when they conquered the Philippines, they were able to integrate us as one territory. In many ways, they helped us become a nation by putting us into one territory. But the problem, of course, is they did not unify our spirit. In fact, they divided us. Because what they did is that they pit us against each other during the rebellions. When we're talking about Spanish armies in the Philippines, it's only the officers who were Spanish. A lot of them were Filipinos who were fighting for Spain. And they were quelling rebellions. And so we were not united by this gesture. It helped us become a geographic country, but it did not unite us in spirit. You know, they introduced their new culture, which is Christianity, and they also usurped. What they did was they usurped the China trade that we used to have with China, and they took it for themselves and made the galleon trade happen, which is of course the galleon trade from Manila to Acapulco, and from Acapulco to Latin American countries, and also up to Spain, which is the longest trade route in the history of the world. But that's why, you know, in many ways, the galleon trade, which made the Spaniards, you know, they will get resources from Filipinos, they will get the crops of the Filipinos, and other parts of Southeast Asia, and they will profit from it, not giving little to Filipinos. So this is the galleon trade route, the longest trade route in the history of the world, even longer than the Silk Route. And this is why the Spanish Empire became rich during that time. They usurped the China trade. But what happened was, with this kind of with the galleon trade, also came in other cultures. For example, the Mexicans carved an image of Jesus Christ carrying the cross. It's called the Black Nazarene. They also carved other images, which eventually became the Virgin of Antipolo, which we have deep devotion for. And as I said, what happened was, instead of course, they forced us to become Catholic. But instead of being Spanish Catholics, what happened was, because our culture is resilient, our culture is strong, we accepted Christianity and made it our own because we mix our beliefs, our rituals to the Christianity that the Spaniards gave us and transformed it and made it our own. So that's why, for example, you see the Black Nazarene procession is different from the Black Nazarene procession in Spain. Our expression is mixed with how we used to. Our expression, our moves, our rituals expresses our old faith, our old culture. And that's why in many ways that helped us still cope with a lot of vicissitudes in life. And you look at the colorful, I wasn't able to put pictures here, the colorful festivals, for example, in Cebu, in Iloilo, on the Santo Niño, the infant Jesus. If you look at it, these are the dances that they dance there were war dances of the Bagani against their enemies. And this time, what happened was the enemy of the Christianized Filipinos would be the Muslims from the south and the other people from the south, not just the Muslims. Because what happened was, of course, as we said, we Filipinos were used to be the masters of the seas. But what happened was we were enslaved by the Spaniards and we were building the galleons for them. And what happened was, of course, the sultanates did not want any of that, and they resisted. And the South used to be the center of economic life in the islands. The South was prosperous. The sultanates were prosperous. And what happened was, the Spaniards took away the China trade from the sultanates, from the Muslims. And so what happened was they retaliated by raiding the coastal towns and getting slaves to sell to other Europeans. That's why if you're going to go to other coastal towns in the Philippines, you will still see what they call Moro watchtowers. So again, this is the colonial experience divided the hearts of the Filipinos in many ways. We were pitted against each other because of that. And I hope that with this history, we will understand these old wounds and we're going to understand more why there's resentment there. Despite the fact that we are one nation, we are one people now. So the Dutch also came and they also threatened the Spanish the Spanish empire here in the Philippines, and that's why we built our churches as watchtowers, as forts, so that people can come there and defend themselves in a time of attacks of the mangangayaw, of the mangangayaws from Mindanao. And they also, they built churches. And if you're going to look at it, these churches are actually defense against these raids. We also mix our art. We also mix that when you look at Philippine Baroque, it's actually hybrid of European church and Filipino sensibilities. That's why anything that was an influence of the foreigners, we transform it to make it our own. And it becomes part of our Philippine architecture already. It becomes us. That's how great our culture is. Of course, the Spaniards, despite the fact that culturally they were able to contribute something, it was harsh because they were giving us policies that enslaved us, like the 40-day forced labor called the Polos y Servicios, the land grabbing that they did, and they formed their land, their plantations like the haciendas, and all of that, which of course um, made the Filipinos poor. The quota that they gave to Philippines, that you cannot sell to the other people, you can only sell to the Spaniards. These things made us poor. And that's why the reaction to that were what we call the revolts. The various revolts that happened, about 100 revolts. We did not sleep during the time of our enslavement. 100 revolts happened during the 333 years of the Spanish regime. Some of them were led by women, like Gabriela Silang of Ilocos, who led the Ilocos revolt after her husband was assassinated, Diego Silang. You also have the Gohoy, who victoriously was able to hold the line for about 83 years, or 85 years if I'm not mistaken, in Bohol. Okay? So these are just some of the revolts that happened during that time. There were many revolts. There was the Basi revolt in Ilocos, because it's a reaction against the monopoly of the Basi wine by the Spaniards, monopolizing it, and they cannot sell to their fellow men, and they created the black market, an underground market of Basi or sugarcane wine uh, in Ilocos, and then they started planning a revolution to overthrow the Spanish regime. Of course, they failed. Uh, but what happened was economic changes will happen in the Philippines by the 1800s. So by the 1800s, what will happen was that the galleon trade will end. The galleon trade will end, and Spanish monopoly of the economy of the Philippines will end as well. And so since they don't have money anymore, they don't have source of income, what happened was the Spaniards will open the ports of the Philippines to other foreigners like the British, like the Dutch, like the French, like the Germans. And so the foreigners will come in, invest in the Philippines, like Nicholas Loney, the British guy who invested in sugar in Iloilo, or Yves Sherman Gaston, who invested in sugar in Negros, for example. What will happen was that they are going to make these foreigners, they were going to make the Indios, they were called the Indios at the time, the native Filipinos, and the Mestizo Chinese, the mixed race of Chinese and Filipinos, the Chinese mestizos, they're going to have economic opportunity because of these changes. They will become the middlemen of these foreigners. And so eventually, the Indio, who was before, when you're born an Indio, you will die an Indio. You are like a fourth-class citizen in the Philippines at that time. What happened was they suddenly became moneyed. They will have money, and eventually they're going to send their kids to school. If you remember the three priests, Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora, they were educated Indios who eventually became priests, secular priests, because at that time they were discriminating Filipinos not to be part of the actual orders. The Dominicans, the Franciscans, the Recollects, the Augustinians, and the Jesuits. They're not allowed to become priests. They're not allowed to become priests from the order. They only become secular priests or diocesan priests, if you may. But what happened was these priests were trying to get equality, an equal treatment from the Spaniards. They want to be part, they want to strengthen secularization of the parishes. To have more secular priests as head of the parishes. But because of their campaign, what happened was they were involved by their enemies in a mutiny, and they were convicted in a kangaroo trial, which eventually led them to this vile device on February 17, 1872. This is called the Garroteville. The Garroteville doesn't strangle the victim. The big screw there is turned and it will break the neck or the spine of the person. And it is said that this will produce instant death. To have a humane death, I suppose. Well, I really do not know. I cannot tell. Nobody lived to tell the tale, you know. And so this incident of brutality by the Spaniards, when these priests, innocent of the crime, were executed by violently, this awakened a whole generation of Indios who eventually went to school because their families became moneyed with the economic changes. These people will call themselves the Ilustrados because they believe in the Enlightenment philosophy of the Illustration. Of course, you know some of them: Jose Rizal, Marcelo del Pilar, Graciano Lopez Haina. They went to Spain to campaign for reform, to lobby for reforms. And in order to successfully lobby for reforms, they have to prove to the Spaniards in Spain that we are worthy of our freedoms, that we are a civilized people. And so in the process of asking reforms from Spain, they researched about our history. They told the Spaniards we had the culture before the coming of the Spaniards. And eventually people are learning more about our ancestors, our past, our common past. And in the writings of our heroes, in the La Solidaridad, in the Noli Me Tangere, in the El Filibusterismo of Jose Rizal, they were able to remind people that we have one experience of pain through the character of Maria Clara, through the character of Elias, through the character of Crispin and Basilio, in the novels of Rizal, through Padre Damaso, through Padre Salvi, we're able to feel that we have one misfortune. And through their researches, we are able to realize that we are one people, that we have a history. And this is the reason why the propagandists, according to Benedict Anderson, invented the nation. We are an imagined community which was based on the words of our heroes. We became a nation because we read them. And we realized that we are one people. But it was Andres Bonifacio who put action into words. He was inspired by the writings of Rizal. He was also inspired when he read the French Revolution, when he read the lives of the presidents of the United States. As I discussed in my book, Bayani Biographies, Andres Bonifacio, with Professor John Ray Ramos of the Ateneo de Manila, with Emilio Jacinto, they were able to create the nation through the words, through their essays, through their poetry, in the Katipunan newspaper Kalayaan, and through the Kartilya ng Katipunan or the rules of the Katipunan. Emilio Jacinto was about only 18 years old when he joined the Katipunan of Andres Bonifacio. They created a secret society called the Kataas-taasan Kagalang-galang na Katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan, or the highest and most venerable association of the sons of the people, or KKK. It's not a clan, okay? It's KKK. Kataas-taasang kagalang-galang na katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan. Highest and most honorable, highest and most venerable association of the sons of the people. They have this primer of the Katipunan which they gave to new members, which tells us of their goals. What were their goals? You know, there's a lot of misconception about Andres Bonifacio and the Katipunan as, you know, stupid people who revolted and they just, you know, they just fight. they did not have a philosophy, which is not true. It's bullshit. They had a philosophy. And according to the second paragraph of this Kartilya ng Katipunan, it says, this association pursues a most worthy and momentous object, to unite the hearts and minds of all the Tagalogs by means of an inviolable oath, in order that this union may be strong enough to tear aside that thick veil that obscures thought or blinds our minds, and to find the path of righteousness, reason, and enlightenment. Katwiran, from the word matuwid, ang kaluluwa. Katwiran, from the word matuwid, reason and enlightenment, or righteousness, and then enlightenment, kaliwanagan. If you're going to look at it, the Katipunan was inspired by the works of Rizal and the French Revolution and the American presidents, that we can be free, but it was guided by the continuous consciousness from our ancestors. And when Bonifacio did this, used this, he was able to become understood by the people. Rizal might have wrote their writings in Spanish, but people talked about them, but they were not able to read them directly. But what Bonifacio did was to translate some of the ideas of Rizal into some things that are understandable, and so that the people will join them in the Katipunan, in the revolution. Because he was using both world history, Philippine history, and the consciousness of our ancestors. So, to be united in the path of righteousness, reason, and enlightenment. But some people will tell me, sir, Bisaya ako, sir. Dili naman kami kasama dyan sa sinasabi ni Bonifacio na yan. Bakit Tagalog lang ang sinabi niya? And the Kapampangans will tell you, oh, no kami lang Kapampangan, no, trying Tagalog mo ken, ako Diyos ko. But you know what? If you're going to look at the asterisk in the Tagalog, nag-footnote pala yung Lolo Emilio Sintonio. And in the footnote, it says, the word Tagalog means all those who came from this archipelago, therefore even a person who is a Visayan, an Ilocano, or a Pampango, etc. is therefore a Tagalog too. Andres Bonifacio, the father of the Filipino nation, was not stupid. He had a vision for the nation, a united people, going back to Tagalog, because we are all Tagalog from the River Delta. People from the River Delta, Tagalog. The Austronesians. The maritime culture. On the second page, what is the commandment, first commandment of the Katipunan? Is to kill? Is to be violent? No. It says there, one of the foremost rule here is true love of the native land and to have lubos na pagdadamayan or genuine compassion for one another. To love. To love. That is the vision of Bonifacio, is we Filipinos begin to love ourselves as a people, each other. What is love then? Ano ang pag-ibig? According to the Decalogue, which was written by Andres Bonifacio himself in his own handwriting, relieve with fervent heart in the Creator and reflect always that a sincere faith in Him involves love of one's native land, because this shows true love for one's fellow. Love of God, love of bayan, native land, and love of fellow man are three inseparable loves that were taught to us by our heroes. I would show you a very short clip in Tagalog, and I hope that you still understand the lesson of our, is it? Tagalog, which represents the what they call this? The aral of Andres Bonifacio and Emilio Jacinto.
isang malaki at banal na kadahilanan ay puno na walang lilim, kundi mandamong makamandag. Ang gawang magaling na nagbubuhat sa paghahambog o pagpipita sa sarili at hindi talagang nasang gumawa ng kagalingan ay di kabaitan. Ang tunay na kabanalan ay ang pagkakawang gawa, ang pag-ibig sa kapwa, at ang isukat ang bawat kilos, gawat pangungusap sa talagang katuwiran. Maitim man o maputi ang kulay ng balat, lahat ng tao'y magkakapantay. Mangyaring ang isa'y hihigtan sa dunong, sa yaman, sa ganda, ngunit di mahihigtan sa pagkatao. Ang may mataas na kalooban, inuuna ang puri kaysa pagpipita sa sarili. Ang may hamak na kalooban, inuuna ang pagpipita sa sarili sa puri. Sa taong may hiya, salita'y panunumpa. Huwag mong sayangin ang panahon. Ang yamang nawalay mangyayaring magbalik, ngunit panahong nagdaan ay di na muli pang magdadaan. Ipagtanggol mo ang inaapi, kabakahin ang umaapi. Ang taong matalino'y ang may pag-iingat sa bawat sasabihin. Matutong ipaglihim ang dapat ipaglihim. Sa daang madinig ng buhay, ang mga magulang ang patnugot ng mag-anak. Kung ang umaakay ay tungo sa sama, ang pagtutunguhan ng inaakay ay kasamaan din. Ang babae ay huwag mong tingnan isang bagay na libangan lamang, kundi isang katuwang at karamay ng lalaki sa mga kahirapan nitong buhay. Gamitin mo ng buong pagbibitagan ang kanyang pisikal na kahinaan at alalahanin ang inang pinagbuhatan at nag-iwig sa iyong kasanggulan. Ang di mo ibig gawin sa asawa mo, anak at kapatid, ay huwag mong gagawin sa asawa, anak at kapatid ng iba. Ang kamahalan ng tao'y wala sa pagkahari, wala sa tangos ng ilong at puti ng mukha, wala sa pagkaparing kahalili ng Diyos, wala sa mataas na kalagayan sa balat ng lupa. Wagas at tunay na mahal na tao kahit laking gubat at walang nababatid kundi sariling wika. Yaong may magandang asal, may isang pangungusap, may dangal at puri. Yaong di nagpapapit, di nakikiapi. Yaong marunong magdamdam at marunong lumingap sa bayang tinubuan. Paglagana ng mga aral na ito at maningning na sisikat ang araw ng mahal na kalayaan dito sa kaaba-abang sangkapuluan at sa bugan ng matamis niyang liwanag ang nangagkaisang magkakalahit magkakapatid ng ligayang walang katapusan. Ang mga ginugol na buhay, pagod at mga tiniis na kahirapay, labis nang matutumbasan.
So, in summary, if we are able to continue the consciousness of our ancestors, the things that we value, the kabutihang loob, the consciousness of kabutihang loob, of pagiging bagani, of loving each other. The promise of Emilio Jacinto in the Katipunan was that we will become a more maginhawang bayan. But of course, what happened was, I would like to emphasize this, that Jacinto's concept of freedom is very, very good. Because it says here that the concept of freedom is when nang dahil sa adhikain ko'y napagkakaisa ang mga tao at kinalilimutan ng bawat isang pansariling pakinabang at walang nakikita kundi ang higit na kabutihan ng lahat. Our people only become free when we do good to each other. We stop being selfish. And when we are good to each other, we ensure that we will live lives in a free way. Because we will not be hurting each other and all of that. This is the ideals that were taught to us by our heroes. And you should understand why in many ways, despite the fact that, Rizal, the Ilustrados were really great, we had a language barrier and a consciousness barrier because they were Western educated. What will happen was that the people like Andres Bonifacio were more grassroots. He was not totally poor, but he was grassroots. They were able to articulate in the language and the imagery of the local Filipinos how they define what is a bayan. So, the Westerners, for example, were talking about the republic, that we are citizens with rights guaranteed under the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, in short, political freedoms. But for Andres Bonifacio, it was more than that. The people should treat and love each other as brethren. We are magkakapatid. They had the sandugo. They returned to the sandugo as their ritual. That they should have mabuting asal, as you saw in the cartilla, towards true well-being and freedom. And the good thing about what the Katipunan articulated, especially Andres Bonifacio, was that sovereignty and the power belongs to the people. That's why they called the Philippines Haring Bayan. Haring Bayan. Bayan is the people. Hari means sovereign. We are the powerful in this country. So it was said that the Americans who introduced to us democracy, but Andres Bonifacio actually had the grassroots concept of democracy. Sovereign nation, haring bayan, people power. And so how do we have true freedom? When we feel our kaginhawaan. True freedom comes from kaginhawaan. And as we know from Filipino psychology, kaginhawaan comes from mabuting kaluluwa. And that's why you have the Kartilya ng Katipunan. They teach this so that we will become maginhawa. We will only feel our freedom if we are maginhawa. Even if you have the right to vote. If you are not eating 3 times a day, can you feel your freedom? This makes total sense to Filipinos. The Haring Bayan. This is the dream of Andres Bonifacio, where people have real power. That people love each other as brothers and we unite against a common cause to bring kaginhawaan to our countrymen. We will be commemorating 125 years of our national anthem. But before our national anthem today, Andres Bonifacio actually had one composed. And maybe some of you haven't heard it. I'll try to make you listen to it and let us look at the lyrics and what they meant. This is the Marangal na Dalit ng Katagalugan, the honorable song of the Tagalogs. So if you look at the lyrics of the song of the national anthem that Andres Bonifacio wanted, because he was the first leader of a national government, that's why I consider him the first president. But let us not argue about that now. This national anthem tells us that the Katipuneros wanted to forward kahusayan, excellence, not just giting, but excellence. And so I would like to dedicate that song to our sponsors. Sir Ryan, can we identify our sponsors today?
Thank you, Professor. Just a quick
That's all.
interruption because I know she's leaving. Our sponsor, one of our sponsors today is Caesar Entertainment. They've been really gracious and helping us with the day. And Sheila Lyles back there, fellow Pinay, with the National Filipino for Sheila. And he's again very graciously one of our sponsors. Sheila, if I can
Sure. NAPA has been great partners with us over the years. So it was really Caesar's pleasure to be a part of this. So thank you, Ryan. Thank you to the entire committee that put together this lovely content. Thank you, Professor Xiao. Everything's been great. I'm looking forward to the continued education through the day, and I hope to see you guys at the walking tour this evening too. So thank you guys.
Thank you. She said a quick
Thank you so much. It's lovely to meet you, madam. And again, thank you for sponsoring this talk of ours. Okay. All right. So we will now conclude. We're almost in the conclusion because we're only up to 1898. We're not tackling the whole of Philippine history. But as I said, what happened was we fought the revolution in 1896 with these ideals. This is the vision of our nation through the eyes of our heroes, the fathers and the mothers of our nation. Rizal was executed because he was a victim of that revolution in many ways. He envisioned it. No, he did not. He inspired it, but he was ambivalent about it. And he became a victim of two Spains. In the Spain in the Philippines, which was backward, he wanted to implement Spain in Spain, in the the Spain that he saw in Spain, he wanted to implement it in the Philippines. It was a liberal Spain, but it did not listen to his pleas to reform the country, the colony, And so in the end, because of this struggle, according to Manuel Sacristians, he was executed. He believed that Spain would give us, it was too late when he praised the revolutionaries. He did not join the revolution. It was too late in his poem when he realized that it was the people who wanted that revolution to happen, that bloodshed to happen, because it was too much already. It was 333 years. But still, the Katipunan held Rizal as our national symbol, as our hero. And the people, of course, recognized Rizal's contribution because Rizal was the best image of what the Filipino can be. Rizal is the person who went around the world, acquired all the knowledge that he can have to offer them to our people. And in many ways, this is what you are doing today in other parts of the world. The revolution was fought bravely by our countrymen. But despite this, despite being united for a moment, the misunderstanding between the educated and people like Andres Bonifacio, who were looking at it in a more native lens, the misunderstanding that says that the Westerners were telling people this Bonifacio doesn't have real government and that we should challenge it. Eventually, they deposed him and they killed him. The French Revolution devoured its children. The Philippine Revolution killed its father. And in many ways, this is symbolic that after that, what democracy that whatever democracy that we had in the country was dominated by some people, not the Haring Bayan. But of course, we do our best to make it happen every day that the people in this country are empowered. Let us not be negative about it. We are a free people. We are a free country. That freedom might not be perfect, but it is here because our heroes fought and died for it. But we should never forget the vision of Andres Bonifacio and that we still have to keep it alive. That the people are empowered, na ang hari ay ang bayan. Of course, what happened was Emilio Aguinaldo took over leadership of the revolution. And of course, he eventually talked to the Spaniards. They had the pack of the biyak na bato. But what he did was he used the money that he got, according to him, to buy more arms and to prepare for a revolution. Once again, they went to Hong Kong, talked to the American officials there, and also in Singapore, and eventually they went back. In 1898, the Battle of Manila began, that struggle, because the Americans, this was the reaction by the Americans to the request of the Filipino revolutionaries to help them bring down Spain in the Philippines. And so with that, of course, they did not have ground troops though. The Americans did not have ground troops at that time, at that early stage. And so it was the Filipinos who fought in various parts of the country to bring down the Spaniards there. And what happened was, with the reports that we are winning the battles against the Spaniards, we proclaimed Philippine independence 125 years ago at the house of General Emilio Aguinaldo in Kawit, Cavite. Continuing the revolution and the making of the nation. And because of this, with the guidance of Apolinario Mabini, he was able to establish, or they were able to establish, the Malolos Congress, which drafted the Constitution, and by January 23 of 1899, the first constitutional democratic republic in Asia was the Republica Filipina. I will not dwell on this too much, but this is to emphasize this great achievement that we Filipinos are lovers of freedom and democracy and human rights. The Americans came, of course, and had a war with us, but that is another story that maybe we can talk about some other time. I go back to kabutihang loob, pakikipagkapwa-tao, pag-ibig that we showed to the Magellan expedition, to the people who come to our shores. When we had first contact with the Spaniards, we showed them humanity. When the last Spaniards were here, for 1 year, they resisted to surrender to the Filipinos. In Baler, Aurora, they thought that it was fake news that the Americans were already in Manila, that the Spaniards, their fellow Spaniards, left the country already. But when they realized, these people realized that it was all over, when they went out of the church of Baler, they were probably expecting to be treated badly. What happened was when they went out, a band played music, joyful music. The people, the Filipinos hugged them, these last Spaniards. Hugged them, treated them well, fed them, and brought them safely back to Spain. General Emilio Aguinaldo proclaiming them as friends, recognizing their valor, their bravery, and telling people, and they on that day they hugged each other, and they Filipinos were calling them amigos, amigos. So we begin with pakikipagkapwa-tao, and we end with story with that, with pakikipagkapwa-tao. And in many ways, I hope that this story of the Philippines will tell us that we translate that pakikipagkapwa-tao with our continuous love for democracy, for inclusion, for human rights, for ensuring that everyone in the Philippines would live a maginhawang buhay. And thank you very much to our Filipino community for being part of this work, for being part of this journey of nationhood. You're not apart from us. You are with us. And thank you for continuing your interest to become Filipinos. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you, Professor Chu. On behalf of all the Filipino Americans here in the U.S. in DC, again, thank you very much. That was amazing. I was awake the whole time. I promise you. I cannot believe we went 2.5 hours. So that really speaks to the content that you have. I know there's going to be a ton of questions. There will probably be questions on Zoom and then here in person as well. I wanted to get it started with a question that I have for you, Professor Chua. What do you think, when the studies that you've done it with the Filipinos that are all over the world, and as you said, it's one of the, I forget how you phrase it, but it's one of the largest diasporas, in history. Do you think that helps bring us closer? The fact that we're now all over the world, or perhaps it, in some way it makes us a little bit more separated in the sense that we develop our own maybe subcultures, for Filipinos all over the world. What are some of your thoughts about that?
Well, because of the echo, I wasn't able to understand some of the words. But can you repeat just the last part at least?
Oh yeah, I was saying, what are your thoughts on what you think now that Filipinos are all over the world? Do you think that helps Filipino culture become stronger, or perhaps maybe dilutes it a little bit?
Okay. As I said, my belief in culture is that it's a dynamic thing. So when we talk about Filipino culture, it's inevitable that when we go to other parts of the country, it would become the different thing. But what I'm telling you, what I'm at least thinking of, is that we retain the core of that culture. So there would be different manifestations of it, but there would still be the, shall we say, the same diwa. And so you identify what diwa is that. Is it kaginawaan, pag-ibig, all of these things? If it's still there, then it's still Filipino culture. What I believe was that our interactions with foreign cultures actually made our culture more colorful, more vibrant. Filipino food, for example, now has siopaw, di ba? Pansit, adobo, for example. There's a Spanish mix. There's Philippine. It's a colorful. It's a color. What became Philippine culture that is today was strengthened by the influences that we have had. So I believe that if the only thing that will happen is that if we forget our roots totally, that is a bad thing. So we embrace the world by knowing ourselves more. So before you can face the world, you should know yourself first. As we always say, you cannot love your culture, you cannot love your girlfriend, you cannot love your boyfriend, your wife, your husband, if you do not know her. So the first act of love is to know that person, to know our culture, to know our history, so that we can truly love her. I guess that's my. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Professor. Oh, just go to the mic.
Good evening, Professor Chua. My name is Mario Santo Domingo. I'm the president of the Filipino American Academy of Science and Engineering. I was a friend of Dante Ambrosio, your mentor, and I was a student of Xiao Salazar, open Aragon. So I'm very familiar with your infusion, Filipino psychology to your discussion of history. My question is, my concern about how all this information are integrated into the teaching of history among the young kids. In the Philippines, for example, how much influence do you have and other historians who have this orientation, about the early Filipinos, and therefore are have a very strong element of the Filipino identity, in the study of history currently, and what do you think is the direction of history education in the Philippines, considering all of this information? Salamat po.
Salamat po. This is very beautiful question because incidentally, you think, I think I appear tired on the video because all this week we are actually finalizing the curriculum of the Araling Panlipunan, or the AP, which is where history is in the primary levels from grades 1 to 12, grades 1 to 10. So I'm working with the Department of Education, Now I'm one of the resource persons and consultant. And if you're going to look at just the draft for public consultation of the new curriculum, I believe that it's a very good curriculum. Just to tell you a little bit of it, without, of course, defying my non-disclosure agreement with the Department of Education, I think I can tell you this, that what we did when we historians sat on the and the experts sat on the curriculum, what we did was the content was okay, but I think it needed a little bit of perspective. And the knowledge of that history is not just a story. There's method in it. It's an evidence-based discipline, number one. And number two, that there are perspectives in history. You cannot have a myopic view that this is the only truth in history. There are incidences of history that is you have evidence of it, but you can look at it at different lens. Because what's happening now in the country is that in the face of fake news or disinformation, what is happening is we are thrown apart because what happened was we only have a notion that our version of history is the only correct version. So there's one truth, but there are many ways of looking at it. And when you recognize that is when you're able to be united. Because even if you are different with each other, history can unite you. But what's happening now is we are thrown away together, apart. And so what I inputted in the curriculum is that in the grade 5, before you study Philippine history, there is a part where you learn what is history, what is kasaysayan, and then that there are perspectives and there are what we call methodologies in history. And number 2, what we try to do is to tweak the curriculum so that when we talk about that parts of history, you're not talking about panahon ng Kastila or panahon ng Amerikano. No. you first put sinaunang bayan, not pre-colonial, because when you say pre-colonial Philippines, that is saying that the important thing is the colonial history. Like prenatal and postnatal and pre-mortem and post-mortem, the important thing is the mortem or the natal. No. And that's why I don't want to say, sometimes I'm still slip, but I don't want to say pre-colonial. I call it sinaunang bayan, the ancient Philippines. So in the curriculum, the discussion, and there's the one whole quarter on the, I think even 2 quarters, I forgot already, on the history of our ancestors. Sinaunang bayan. And then when the Spaniards came, I said, instead of saying panahon ng Kastila, we said bayan sa ilalim ng Espanya. Bayan sa ilalim ng Amerika. Pagtindig ng bayan. Ano ng bayan. So what we did was to make the bayan the center of the story. We the people and the Philippines. We're not talking about, for example, in the Spanish period, the governor-generals of the Philippines. We are talking about the experience of Filipinos under colonialism and how we created the bansa. So from bayan, sinaunang bayan, bayan under the colonial masters, we united into becoming a bansa. Which this is the what we want to emphasize to the kids. And so I hope that it would not just be about memorization, but telling the story of the people in such a coherent way. So I hope I answered your question. But again, when we fix the curriculum, and I think I'm very proud of that curriculum that we will release, the problem is the textbooks are another problem. So credible people should use, the writers should use credible sources, credible information to put there. And even if you have good books and good curriculum, if the teachers will still go back to what they used to teach, like the Ita, Indonesian, Malay, and all of that, then we're goner. Because sometimes when you're a teacher, you do not want to learn other things anymore. You stick with what you had because that is what you're doing for many, many years. And so there are three different things to consider: the curriculum, the textbooks, and the implementation of that curriculum to the classroom. And I think the third one is more difficult to monitor than the two. So what is the direction? I am positive because what the way the teachers teach now is different. Before, they do not have access to a lot of this information about and videos that experts made, the online lectures, especially during the pandemic. But now they have all of that. A lot of the teachers are at par with knowledge when it comes to history, with actual historians in many, many ways. And this has happened because public history has been widespread, despite the many challenges of this information. So I'm very positive that we will have a better teaching of history in the coming years. And thank you for the question.
So, hi, Professor Xiao. First of all, thank you for such a wonderful lecture. But I think my question is, growing up in the Philippines and here in the US, is that how can we bridge the gap of the disparity between Filipino Americans and also Filipinos in the Philippines? Because sometimes probably some Filipinos in the Philippines would think, oh, Filipino Americans are tabok, or some sort of like they're trying to regain back their culture through Filipino American history that some Filipinos in the Philippines could think as something a bit disrespectful to the Philippines itself. So any thoughts on how can we bridge the gap of Filipino Americans and Filipinos?
We are talking about the appropriation thing, the appropriation issue, is that right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So when just to give a little more, just to I think clarify my thoughts on it. It's when you want to go back to your culture, but when you appropriate these things, the interpretation is that you have disrespecting the culture. Is that right?
Yes, some sort of. So let's
Yeah, yeah.
say Americans are trying to use the baybayin more than the Filipinos and Philippines. So kind of some sort of in that sense.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I will tell you that you just became a victim of the usual divisions between the heritage community or the cultural community, like what happened with Andres Bonifacio and Emilio Aguinaldo. Do you get me? We Filipinos, number one, we're very harsh on ourselves. We're very harsh on our kababayans. And number two, we're a very political people. We all know that. It's politics that divide us. You know, hopefully culture and history should unite us, but politics divide us. And so in many ways, the views on heritage by some people, when some of them become first purists, they will think that you are disappropriating. I mean, by the way, we have two different nuances with the term appropriation, because Filipino historians here in the Philippines, our term for appropriation is positive. It's positive. Okay? In the West, it has become negative. Because when you say appropriation, it's actually for us misappropriation. When you use the culture for other things, like, but for me kasi, if you just want to use it, it's okay. But when you try to distort it, that is when it becomes bad. Now, you just have to be careful with some of the ethnic groups, for example, because when you try to copy their culture, some of them, parang they are saying that you should pay your respect by, they don't ask money, but just coordinate with them. So that is when, like for example, what happened with Nas Daily and Wang Ud. That's total misunderstanding, because I think the Wang Ud and her people allowed Nas to document the the tattoo process, the pambabatok. But the problem is when they marketed that video to be shown, it says learn how to make tattoos of the ipuga of the kalinga in 2 days or in 2 hours, something like that, and then there's payment to watch the video. Parang it's a, you know, probably they were wrong with the wording. If you said, you know, just appreciate how Wang Od makes tattoos, it would have been all right. But you say learn how to make tattoos in 2 hours, when, you know, Wang Od learned it for many years. You get me? So I think there, it's sometimes it's just misunderstanding, and it's good to ask permission if you can ask permission, but because, you know, there in the cultural world, you know, there are gatekeepers, and sometimes I'm a victim of that, because even the academics have gatekeepers. I use concepts in my lectures, and there are people who will say, you know, you cannot use it without my permission. But, you know, my point is, you know, I get to cite you anyway. But these things belong to the people. I have no intention of misappropriating it or taking it away from you. And sometimes, you know, that is it's still an, I think my answer to that is it's a continuing conversation. But I hope that I'm able to convey a little bit of an answer in the many things that are going around my mind now. Thank you, Mar. It's an honor to meet you and talk to you via Zoom.
Any more questions on Zoom?
By the way, I thank you all for your patience for the 2 hours.
I'm Professor Chua. My name is Rafael Tabilia Chavez. I'm a GW student here in DC. And I wanted to ask, of the sort of era, so to speak, that you shared with us, what would you say is the most interesting or most challenging to study? And then out of curiosity, can you explain the historical significance one more time with the necklace that you wear on your neck?
Okay, the first question is, what is challenging to study, sir? I'm sorry, I lost it.
So of the eras that you showed us today in your presentation, what were the most challenging or most interesting eras to study?
Well, my specialization is really the more recent history, but I cannot talk about that now. So yeah, I will keep my mouth shut. But, 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 I'm even though I'm not an expert on the pre-colonial history, I really like and I don't know ng pre-colonial or the history of the ancient Filipinos. What I realize is that talking about it is really fascinating for a lot of people because how do you say this? A lot of us are enamored with Greek mythology, not realizing that we have our own mythology. I did not talk about it, but there's a separate lecture for that. We have different mythologies, you have different ways and things that are not familiar with us, but we want to get in touch with it. I mean, like baybayin, for example. I'm not into making baybayin the alphabet or the script of the Filipinos to force them to use it. But I appreciate that to use it to connect to the past. Because remember that when you connect to the past, it gives meaning to your existence. And that's why a lot of people, I mean, you can just go on with your life and, it's fine without connecting to your roots as Filipinos. But when you connect to your roots as Filipinos, it kind of completes you and makes you feel good about yourself and makes you know yourself better. Because our culture is a consciousness that is there even if you do not know it. Because it will just come out. It will spring from you. And so yeah, I'm fascinated about the ancient Filipino culture because in many ways it triggers a lot of awakening to other people. And I'm also fascinated with the story of Andres Bonifacio and Rizal, of course. And that's why I teach Rizal and why are they fascinating? Because these are people who have limitations. They're human beings just like us. But what they did was, because I'm a weak human being as well. But when you look at them, you get inspired that maybe despite your weaknesses, you can do more things. When you love, you love your family, you love your country, you love God. And this fascinates me. This love that they pour on the things that they do made them great. Made them accomplish great things. And for me, that's fascinating. Now, with the Linglingo design, there are many interpretations of what it meant. Some of it says that it is, there's a design of a deer. Nakaganon. The dalawang deer na magka facing separate sides. There are many things that are there are many designs, but in many ways there's also a gold ancient gold version of this. And if you're going to look at it collectively, they still go to the anting-anting where we use these ornaments to actually represent our faith, our what we believed, to represent our quest to keep our souls matuwid or righteous. So if you're going to look at how this evolved eventually from this to the gold of our ancestors, and then eventually to this. It's the same consciousness that flows in our beliefs. Because the rosary, for many Filipinos, we don't just use it to to as a guide for prayer. We think that this has power as well. And now, of course, religious objects, the cross, rosaries, whatever. So, uh, when I wear this, in many ways, I feel connected to what we used to have and what we continue to have, actually, because our culture is a dynamic culture that, despite the changes that happens, there are things that change, and there the things that remain the same, and what remains the same actually unites and binds us as a people.
Thank you. I think we might have, in the interest of making sure we stay on the program here, we might have one more.
Yeah.
I have a question for Professor Chua. Hi, Professor. I'm Ronnie. So I greatly enjoyed this. I especially the part about ginhawa. There's so many meetings. I always imagine that when my parents speak, I thought it was just like breathing, something like that. So that was pretty nice to hear.
Thank you so. Thank you so.
So I'm married to my spouse is Taiwanese. So with my kids in school, they there's always the culture days, and so we present either Taiwan or Philippine culture, and I heard that you have textbooks for education. I'm wondering if you could recommend any that we could probably find either from the Philippines or Amazon, just for my kids to learn about.
Okay, wait a minute. I look at my place here. I'll show you something. I'll just wait a minute.
Okay.
Okay, just recently, I was able to. Well, I've read this before, but this is still unopened because I'm going to give it to someone. Oops. This is, why am I not open? There, okay. This is not a textbook from school, but this is more of this is a very good summary of Philippine history from I think he is an author, a Filipino author, Jose Raymond Canoy. He's a professor as well, but he is in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, and he made this beautiful history of the Philippines, very grounded, very up to date, in which you can, in easy English, you can be able to understand the flow of Philippine history. Okay. Of course, he doesn't have concepts of like Psikolohiyang Pilipino does. It's really just a plain narration of Philippines. It's very good, very good. But for kids, aside from my Bonifacio biography, and which is part of a series called Bayani Biographies, I think they have a distributor in the States, Kahel Press. There's a series of books called Halo Halo Histories.
Okay.
Halo Halo Histories. The first volume was a long time ago. I'm one of the consultants of this series of books. Okay, and what they did was they made, for example, the ancient history of the Philippines very accessible for kids. They have beautiful drawings and very cartoonish characters to introduce our culture. Some of the plates are colored, and so your kids will enjoy the presentation of that series. And there's one about money, Philippine money, where you learn history through money. And number 3 is the volume on Jose Rizal's life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I'll look those up.
Thank you so much. And by the way, there's a Filipino in America who created a series of, I think there's also books, but a series of videos in YouTube. His name is Kirby Araulio, and he is very good. I have mine are in Tagalog, and I have a YouTube channel. But Kirby, I think will be also appreciated by your kids. Kirby Araulio.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, we're aware of him. He actually spoke at a NAPA conference as well a couple of years ago during the pandemic. Happy to bring him back and you back as well. I want to personally, again, thank you very much. You did a really fantastic job. I think you kept everyone's attention. So really appreciate it. Speaking of Ginawa, the smell of this steak and a chicken adobo behind us is starting to get into our lungs. So I want to move on to the next section, but please feel free to stay with us. Professor, but if not, again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I know it's close to midnight.
I'm interested in listening to the next part of the program, to the next lecture. And again, it's a great pleasure and privilege to actually talk at our embassy in the United States to represent our country and the Filipino historians. And I hope that I hope that you're going to bring the spirit of the Bagani everywhere you go. God love you. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thank you. Right. Thank you all. See you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Salamat po. Mabuhay. Happy Independence Day to everyone.